this was actually a pretty compelling hook. If we saw them on another podcast, odds are it was a good experience. They had a great time. And so we would just email them saying, hey, we saw that you're on this podcast. Do you have any interest in getting booked on other podcasts? And that response rate was surprisingly high. It was just literally two sentence email, and people ate that up.
You know, for us, when we bring our guests, like it's us. Like we don't have a EA or a VA that does it. That's our decision, because we love to connect on a one-on-one with our guests before they come in and build that relationship. It's a big part of what we do and how we do it. So I think also an important point is like you made the process like your own, and you were so proactive.
I mean, these are all things that you've probably read in a million blog posts, but like it's really important to like think of this when you're about to hit someone up. It's like, what's in it for them? How can I articulate this in the simplest and clearest way possible, and sort of just like make it a no-brainer?
Nope, we don't go. All right, here we go. Hey, I'm Luis.
And I'm Luis.
And you're listening to the Content is Profit podcast,
where we talk about entrepreneurship, mindset, and of course, how to turn your content into profit.
But most importantly, where we come here and have a really, 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 really good time, baby. So go to contentsprofit.com and join the community. You like that spin? I saved it.
I know, you saved it. Take a deep breath before we continue. There we go. Good job. Now, what are we talking about today?
Are you throwing it back at me, man? Oh my God. All right. Episode 243, how to grow your podcast by 40% or more than 40% in 3 months. Let's go. That deserves one of these.
That was like a rough calculation that I did with the data that they threw at us, you know?
I know. Sounds so clickbaity, by the way.
Hopefully my math is right.
I know.
It is very clickbaity.
Yeah, it's all good. But I think it's going to be a good conversation.
Definitely.
To be able to do that, there's so much more that we have to uncover. But before that, Fonzie, do we have a sponsor today?
Indeed, we do. Thank you for asking, good sir. And today's sponsor is your own, the BIZBROS. Yes, we sponsor our own podcast with Content Momentum. And you might be asking yourself, what is Content Momentum? Well, if you produce a long-form piece of content just like this one that you're listening to or watching, and you want to turn it into daily, consistent content, we're here to help you out. Slide in the DMs at BIZBROSCO on Facebook, on Instagram.
Fire emoji, fire emoji, fire emoji.
Is that a cue for the video editors?
Fire emoji. Just put them in there. Yeah. Guys, if you're enjoying this show, go ahead and follow, because every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays, these episodes are dropping in your favorite podcasting platform to go and move and create momentum in your daily life and business.
That is right. And if today's guests help you move one step forward towards your goal, please don't forget to share this episode and leave a 5-star review.
I hope you're ready for today's guest. If you are looking to substantially grow your podcast, to learn the strategies from one of the new hottest podcast networks out there, then this is the conversation for you.
This is going to be epic. Today's guest is the head of podcast growth for the recently formed HubSpot Podcast Network, which has massive podcasts such as Entrepreneur on Fire, Gold Digger, and one of our favorites, My First Million.
That's right, and check this out. Today's guest is responsible for growing My First Million podcast from 700,000 monthly downloads to more than 1 million monthly downloads in just 3 months, meaning My First Million got their first million thanks to today's guest.
Mind blowing. Please welcome the head of podcast growth at HubSpot, your go-to podcasting genius, Jonathan Barshop. What the?
That was epic.
Appreciate it. How you doing, Jonathan?
Welcome.
Great. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Absolutely.
Oh, man. I'm going to give some background on what happened before going live. We've been spending like 30 minutes behind the scenes. You know, we would call this rapport building, but we were trying to figure out how to go live today. It was a struggle.
It's totally our fault, by the way. Just saying. We're just talking about this event like plan A. If it doesn't go right, plan B. What is it? Plan C. And today we failed, Jonathan.
Yeah,
but
we just had a plan
we're
A.
excited. Just plan A. Yeah. How you doing, man? How's your week going?
Good. Going well. Appreciate y'all having me. This is a high energy show. Y'all have a fucking awesome production here.
Let's go.
I'm excited to dive in.
Appreciate it. I think we should, I'm going to make a call out here. Red Bull sponsor us so we can send Red Bulls to all of our guests and, you know, just even raise the level higher up.
Oh, boy. Dude, okay, so here's the thing. I think you and the next 2 people are coming, which we won't announce yet, is like a dream guest for us. And the reason is because of what you have created with the network, and the shows that you guys have in the network have added so much value. I'm literally addicted to my first million. Like if every morning I'm like, a new episode release, like, can you guys do the daily also on my first million? And it's become like this cornerstone of inspiration, bounce ideas, new perspectives, and different things. So thank you so much for bringing out to the world and to the audience that the people are listening or watching right now. This is the incredible thing about publishing and the positive impact that you can create for somebody else. So I just wanted to say thank you to you in person, because it's meant so much what you guys have been doing consistently over some time now.
I appreciate that, but I can't take any credit because that's all Sam and Sean. Like, they have been at it for like 2-3 years at this point. And I mean, as you said, like, it's super addicting. I'm the same way. I started out as it was my favorite show, and I was like, how do I get a job with these guys? And
Incredible.
That's a whole story in itself. But
yeah,
that was the impetus of it. It was like, I need to work with these guys because what they're doing is incredible.
Yes, I love it, man. So I want to hear the story, but before that, you know, I'm guessing there used to be this person called Jonathan Barshop. Pretty cool, right? Going around town, and eventually you got interested into podcasting, and, you know, maybe you started a thing here and there. So why don't you share a little bit about your story? How did you get into the scene podcasting, and maybe how did you get then into working for HubSpot?
Yeah, I always say, like, I'm like the guy who like sneaks backstage at a concert and ends up like going into the VIP and hanging out with Drake type thing. Like, I started out just basically like graduated in 2014, was in a desk job in a cubicle, like hating life. Like I think most people kind of are right out of college. And during that time, I just filled a lot of it with podcasts. So I was listening to Tim Ferriss Show, How I Built This, that kind of stuff. And I was taking a lot of notes on them just for like my own personal sort of journal. And I was like, at a certain point, I had this huge directory of notes. And I'm like, what do I do with this? Like, I maybe turn it into a newsletter, a website. So I started Googling around, and I found this website called the Podcast Wire. And Eric Jacobson, who ended up being my co-founder in our podcast agency, he was running it, where basically he was doing what I was doing. He's taking these like incredible podcasts, whether it's Tim Ferriss or, you know, whatever, summarizing it down in 200 to 250 words and making it a weekly newsletter. And I was like, oh, perfect. I'm already doing this, and he's got some traction already. So he cold emailed him, and he's like, I'm looking for someone to help me with this. So while I was working the desk job, I was like, it was one of those jobs where you can really get away with whatever, like as long as you just get the deliverables out the door when they need to be. And so I feel like I was spending like, honestly, like 75% of my time just doing stuff not work related, all sort of like podcast focused. And so for basically a year, we rebranded the Podcast Wire into a thing called startupmixtape.fm, which is a big directory of some of the best podcasts out there. We haven't updated it since like 2018, but there's some incredible shows on there if anyone wants to check that out. We'd also like do podcaster/creator like profiles. Yeah. So we interviewed like Alex Bloomberg founder of Gimlet, Jordan Harbinger, and just kind of asked them like, what are some of your favorite podcasts? So we kind of tried to make this sort of content newsletter website thing out of it. Eventually, Eric was building out Lemon Pie, our agency, in the background, and he was like, oh, we work really well together on this thing. Why don't we team up on that thing?
Yeah.
So that's where the podcast agency came about. And the podcast agency started as basically a guest booking agency and evolved into a full sort of, we did production, we sort of did a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there.
Awesome. By the way, I relate so much to the part of like you have this job and then you working on your thing on the side, right? That's such a cool time and experience and growth, you know, primer, I guess, on the personal growth, because you're chasing, you know, what you want to do. I'm curious, do you ever see yourself as building something, or was it something out of frustration from that day job or something that were happening at the time?
Yeah, I think I was just really hungry to not even necessarily like do my own thing, but I was just like, I see what all my friends are doing and they seem to be happy, but I'm not. And you know, there's like a whole conversation in that itself, but I was like, I can't do this. I need to find a better solution. I love podcasting. And so when Eric offered me the job, basically taking like a severe cut, but you know, to sort of build my own thing, I was like, no brainer. So I moved back with my mom for a year to make it happen. And then, you know, shortly after moved to Austin. But I was like, I would rather live at home with my mom and figure this thing out because it's way more fun versus being, you know, on the hamster wheel, kind of doing the whole, you know, 9 to 5 thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's be clear, it's not for everybody. Not everybody's willing to take those risks, right? To move back with your mom or take a big pay cut. But at the end of the day, if you are happy, and I know it sounds so cliche, but if you're happy doing, right, chasing what you want to build, at the end of the day, it's probably going to be worth it. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be challenges, up and downs, probably a lot of downs, and you're going to go to some dark places and you're going to you reconsider everything. But then when you see the results, it feels so good, right?
Yeah.
And then
Totally.
life unexpectedly throws you opportunities, right? Like, for example, the one that you're having right now. I mean, I remember when HubSpot released their network, and I was like, dude, this is amazing. And I think it was when they acquired The Hustle and they grabbed my first million and they started the whole network thing. And I was like, I'm going to apply. Let's apply. And I just been like pretty much like closely following what podcasts they're putting in, and they're doing such a smart thing. And you're like in the middle of all that, right? So you went from pretty much being a podcast fanatic, if you want to put it that way, right? Like you really enjoy podcasts and you decided to build something around what you enjoy, to now being probably in one of the most exciting networks out there. There's other networks that have a whole lot of other podcasts, and I don't know if it's because we're in the entrepreneurial world, but we love the whole idea that what you guys are putting together.
Yeah.
But before we go there, I'm pretty curious of
You're just launching hooks today. Like
open loops right here. Before we go there, I'm curious of exploring your experience in Lemon Pie, right? And I'm curious because we have an agency of our own. We don't do the podcast production side of things, right? We work with the content that comes out of that. But it is hard work. And, managing clients, finding the clients, it takes a lot of work. So based on your experience, what does it take to grow an agency, right? And what, maybe if you want to share, what was it that led you to moving on to the next thing?
Yeah, definitely. So me and my co-founder had a really good sort of like relationship. He was sort of like the CEO, sales, so he was great on as far as like if he got someone on a call, he was an assassin and could pretty much close anyone.
Game over.
We also had a really unique hook where we weren't like every other agency out there, PR agency out there. We just focused on podcast PR, essentially like podcast booking. So people would come to us and maybe they're a CEO of a company or an author. We didn't work with a ton of authors. We kind of tried to position ourselves in the B2B space because that's just where more money is.
Yep.
But we positioned ourselves as like the podcast booking agency. And so CEOs and founders would come to us and we'd get them booked on, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 plus shows for as long as they worked with us. And so the way we would get those leads is we basically just had an EA kind of scrape lists of founders and CEOs and C-suite execs at different companies that either just got funding or were well-funded. We worked with HubSpot. We worked with FreshBooks. We worked with, D2C brands like Four Sigmatic, the coffee company, kind of all over the place. And a lot of that was just based off literally cold outreach saying, hey, we saw you. This was actually a pretty compelling hook. If we saw them on another podcast, odds are it was a good experience. They had a great time. And so we would just email them saying, hey, we saw that you're on this podcast. Do you have any interest in getting booked on other podcasts? And that response rate was surprisingly high. It was just literally two sentence email, and people ate that up. So, when we delivered for them, like we didn't just like, talk shop. We actually like did good work. And so, a lot of it was just based on cold outreach, and that's how we would book people on shows. That's how, that's like the sort of my core skill set is like cold outreach and getting people's attention, and that's how we built the company pretty much.
That's awesome. So I'll share a little bit. I don't know what you have in mind, FONZI, but I'll share a little bit of how we got to where we are now to relate a little bit. But we started in a community, right? Like in our business, we started BIZBROS 7 years ago. It's vinyl stickers, screen printing t-shirts, online brand, selling social media to restaurants. Like we pivoted probably like 15 different times, and with every pivot it was a new lesson, right? And we stood together, and it was freelancing mode at the time, right? Finally we invest in this in one of our coaches, and we dial it into just one thing, one process, and that's what allowed us to grow a lot compared to where we were before. Now the community that we were in, like we're trying to communicate with the same community, and we quickly found that maybe the money was not there, right? And maybe it took us a good amount of time to learn that lesson, and a lot of pain. I'm like, man, like, is our product not the right product? Like, is the audience not the right audience? And for us, maybe when we started the show in 2019, right? No, 2020,
well,
March 2020. The outreach to get people inside of the show was not a hard thing, right? Because we're passionate about this. Like, I think just the energy like attracts a lot of it. I do think that we provide a ton of value here, but also we started connecting that to the business side, and allowed us to create that market research as we were publishing as well, and elevating that side. But it's been hard because of the world that we started on, the bootstrap world, right? We're like, oh man, we need to shift. So with our current coach, we had the conversation. We're like, where do we move, right? Is it B2B? Is it agencies, right? So we started in the last month or so, we started working with 2 or 3 agencies, and the process there has been a lot of friction because of the back end, and every agency has a different process. And it's like, oh my gosh, now we have to adapt to that, right? On the product side. Now, so my reflection here is like, okay, where you start on your background will dictate a lot, maybe the speed, right? Maybe how you operate, right? You mentioned EA, like an executive assistant, that you have SOPs, you have processes, right? So how much of that, of your past, maybe of the things and the experiences and the things that you did before that, how much did that affect? Or was there a learning process as you guys were doing this? Because a lot of people that tune into us, they're probably developing a product. They're probably developing a business on the side, and they might be learning on the go, or they're bringing skills with them. So how was that experience for you?
Yeah, I mean, so spot on. It's like you're running an agency, and then one client asks like, hey, can you do this? Like, can you, y'all already doing content for us. Why don't y'all just like produce the podcast? And you're like, yeah, we can do that. And then you start like kind of taking on this like octopus of like different responsibilities and stuff that you never like really anticipated, just because like A, the money's there, and you're like, B, like, yeah, I think I could do this. And what you quickly realize is like you're kind of trying to juggle too much, and it just kind of becomes a lot. And so I think what I would recommend is like just specialize in one thing. Like y'all specialize in content, and that's really smart because everyone needs content. I think, like we specialize in booking, and kind of, like I said, we sort of did production and we did like a few other things, but then we just eventually always came back to PR, podcast booking. Like, full disclosure, we had a production arm in the company and we completely shut it down. This was actually after I left, but shut it down because it was just kind of a nightmare to manage all that.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's just very natural to have sort of that shiny object syndrome, and sort of like you sort of have to chase the cat's tail a few times to realize like that it's not, all it's cracked up to be, and there's a lot of downsides with it, but you can only learn that through experience. And who knows, like maybe you build this agency that kind of is like a one-stop shop and it's incredible. But I think it's in people's best interest to kind of figure out like what their special sauce is and just double down on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also 2 other lessons on what you shared before, right? On how you guys were getting your clients. First, you guys were clear on who you were targeting. And a lot of people, right? And we've been through this journey where we thought we were clear on who we were targeting, and we had the totally wrong customer avatar, if you want to call it that way, right? I mean, we were targeting people that didn't have the purchasing power to afford the service. So then we were asking ourselves, why are we having such a difficult time selling this thing, right? Well, it makes total sense, right? They cannot afford it. You guys were extremely smart and said, what are the companies that are being funded? They just have an influx of cash in the B2B space that are looking to literally be everywhere, looking for a lot of exposure. And that was your target, right? Very, very smart. So again, that's lesson number 1 right there for you listening. Ask yourself, am I 100% clear on who do I want to work with? And also, is that person capable of, acquiring your services? Because if they're not, you might, if you are all about 100% free work and just, give back to the world, pay forward. That's great too. I'm not complaining about that. And the other lesson that I saw that I love is that cold outreach, right? You just sending emails. You said that 2 sentence, it just works like a charm. And I'm curious, how much have you used that skill throughout your life? Was that natural for you? Did you feel awkward at first sending these emails, right? Knocking on people's doors? And did you use this same skill to maybe obtain the opportunity in which you are right now?
Totally. It's maybe like the most valuable skill I have. And I think it's super learnable for everyone. And it's taken me from like getting clients to getting, guests on big shows to landing this job. And it's like, I think, there's like, I could sort of break down the approach, at least in my mind.
Sure.
It's kind of just like, I guess you could break down each of those separately of like, okay, how do you reach out to someone via podcast, like to get on their podcast? How do you reach out to someone like Sam to get his attention? And I guess the thesis is kind of this. It's just like, what's in it for them? And I mean, these are all things that you've probably read in a million blog posts, but like, it's really important to like think of this when you're about to hit someone up. It's like, what's in it for them? How can I articulate this in the simplest and clearest way possible? And sort of just like make it a no-brainer. So like when I would reach out to podcasts, this was not a foolproof method, but like what I would do is I would start out by saying, hey, love your show so much so that I just left you a 5-star review. And in that review, I would like attach it at the bottom. And in that review, like it would be like a really thoughtful like message. And so it's a thoughtful message and it's a value add for them because they get a review. And then I'd kind of go into the email and say, hey, if I know you don't typically take guests or whatever, you kind of have to do your research there, but like, you don't typically take guests or whatever, but would love it if you consider Sam as Sam has built these incredible companies. Here's 3 or 4 things that he can teach your audience. And that's a really important indicator there is like, you don't want to say, hey, Sam has done this and he's done that and he's done all these cool things. Like no one really cares at the end of the day. Like, those are good markers, but like really what podcasters and what people care about again is like what's in it for them. So when you're reaching out to a podcaster, I would always be like, okay, here's the 5 or so things that he can teach your audience. That would be a value add. And then just wrap it up by saying, absolutely no sweat if it's not a fit or the timing isn't right. P.S. here's the media kit. So that's kind of like the general framework. And that kind of holds true if you're trying to hit up Sam in the DMs or whatever. It's like, hey, Sam. Yeah. And you kind of have to restructure things a little bit, but it's like, what's in it for them? Yep. How can I add value up front and have 0 expectations?
Yeah. By the way, if we would have received a message from you guys, I think it would have been like, yes, every single time. It's crazy. We have this email attached to probably, I think it's listen notes, to be honest. And we get every single day, there's something there. And like, there's some attempt of doing it that way, but I take a second to read it, right? And then I also take a second to answer sometimes. I'm like, awesome, what was your favorite part of this episode? Whatever, right? Because they just are very general, and then you don't hear from them at all, right? Because here's full disclosure for the ones listening, right? Like for us, we obviously deal with people that produces content, right? So people that do podcasts might also produce content, visual. So for us, that agency could also be a source of leads if it's a good relationship. So it's in my best interest to respond back and see if there's a relationship there. But it's incredible how many people don't respond back to these things, right? Yeah. Which could also mean an opportunity for them, right? Like if the question is, am I serving my client? Am I serving the people that I work with in the best of my ability? That's probably not the scenario. So let this be a lesson of like what to do and also what not to do whenever you're reaching out, whether that's your service or something else.
And I think that's a big differentiator, right? Like that was the reason why we were able to kind of like charge higher premiums and deliver better results, was because we weren't just like spraying and praying. Like I'm sure a lot of the emails you get where it's all templatized and you don't get a response when you even, you like ping them a few times, and every email we sent, like for the most part at least, was totally personalized. So I mean, and it's crazy how like you can just like really different, like really stand out from the crowd by just being like literally like 5% better. It's not, doesn't take a lot, but it's just like,
absolutely. I think investing the time up front to actually do some real research about the other person goes a long way. It'll just set you apart. I still remember this one that we received one day. It was an assistant pitching somebody, right? I mean, who they were working for. And the way they did it, it honestly like upsetted me a little bit, because they were like, oh, we listened to your stuff. We actually left your review. And they screenshotted, not the review, but they screenshotted kind of like the box when you're typing it. So they hadn't submitted it yet. It was just a screenshot of that. And I was like, oh, nice. And I go and I like check the reviews, and I never saw that review. So I'm like, these people just like type it and they don't actually publish the review, right? And they expect it was also a very general email. So I answered, I was like, I don't remember the exact answer. I try not to be too rude or anything, but I was like, hey, awesome. Yeah. What was your favorite part of the podcast? I would love, the episode that you listened to. And yeah, people just disappear, right? And that lack of follow through as well. I feel, okay, maybe if let's say you send that general message, if they get back to you asking what part of the episode that you enjoy the most, guess what? Go and listen to the episode and then tell them which part you enjoy as well. But it's like people
so much of my success with outreach is in the follow-up game, like you said, because they get the first email, and that's sort of like the media kit, right? Like that's like, here's Sam or whoever, here's why they're cool, here's what they can teach your audience, and then from there it's like they either respond pretty instantly because they're like, yes, this is a great fit, or they're like, whatever, send it to the side. And so the follow-up game is like almost more important than the actual initial email, and like that is where you can really, like, that was honestly some of my favorite parts, because then you'd have to spend time to do a little bit of research and figure out. I would do some like probably too intense stuff, but I would like go to their Twitter, figure out what they're interested in. Like, oh, they like Game of Thrones. Let me find a funny Game of Thrones gif. And then I'll throw that into follow-up email and just be like, hey, did you catch, this last episode? Crazy, like whatever, that kind of stuff. And that was because at the end of the day, like when people send those templatized emails, like you said, it's like, this is probably just a robot. This is probably just, a one-click like mass email blast. But the moment I know there's actual human on the other side, like that kind of changes the dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this might sound a little creepy, but I added you on Instagram today. I was like, oh man, this guy has an Instagram. Let's go follow him. And I noticed that you are like the master of crockpots too, So,
it's been on a chili kick lately.
Hey, honestly, it looked good. I was like, man, I wish I knew how to do something at the crockpot.
When we go, I mean, you just shoot yourself in the foot. Now that we go there, you're gonna have to like make something when we go visit. And you're more than invited to come to Jacksonville, Florida, and we eat some Venezuelan arepas. It's happening. No, I love it. And this is the best part of this, right? Like the conversation that we had over the last few weeks has been all about the relationships that we build over content, right? And it's like, okay, just now at the event that we were at, Dave, which you guys work with, like Dave Gerhardt, like was saying, like was asking to the group, like, what do you feel when you publish? Like, what are the things that you've noticed, like about these things when you are consistent and building the relationships? And it's about that because opportunities will follow, right? Like you connect, you talk, you have things in common, like Game of Thrones or crockpots or arepas or whatever that is, right? For example, we have a crazy story with Monica, like this guest that came in. This was when Clubhouse was a really big thing before Sean, tweeted that it was gonna fail, and it was true. And we jump on this room and it's just her, and she starts talking to me, and this was a person that came to the show, and we're like, sweet, she lives in Boise, Idaho, at the other side of the country where we're at. And we start having conversations like, where are you cooking? And I'm like, cooking at night. I'm like, I'm making this thing called an arepa. She's like, oh my gosh, what's an arepa? And I'm like, well, I explained what it is. 2 weeks later, we're in Boise, Idaho for an event, and she texts like, you guys are here, you have to come to my house and make the arepa, right? So we ended up meeting with her at her house, cooking this massive batch of arepas for her family. We ended up staying with them for like 4 days.
Yeah.
Well, she is very in the community that we're in, and was able to introduce us to incredible people that have meant the world to us and our business, not just like client wise, but like mentors and people that helped us in moments of need. So invest in that relationship from the get-go is incredible. So thank you for sharing like how you do it, because I think a lot of people are missing the mark big time, and these are actionable steps that they can implement today to actually make that happen and move that forward. So thank you.
Totally. And like, it's like those relationships can come very organically and like result in y'all cooking arepas together, or it can be like I have like a DM from someone from like 4 years ago, and then bumped into them in Austin like a week ago, and now we're buds. It's like those, like, there's so many dots that you can't connect in the moment, and then looking back, the standard Steve Jobs saying, it's like, yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely. So I feel like this has something to do with how then you transition into HubSpot, right? And I'm curious to hear that story. How was it? Did you create the opportunity? The opportunity came to you because of these relationships. How did the Go experience go? Yeah, so after I exited the agency in early 2021, I kind of just spent a few months to kind of like try my hand at like my own podcast, which didn't last long. I still have dreams of bringing it back, but did that for a little bit and did some work with Noah Kagan, who's
nice,
big marketer. He's been growing his YouTube channel really
his
heavily over the
YouTube
last 2
game
years.
is on point. Like I've been loving his videos when he goes to houses and like cold outreach. It's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, his producer is one of my best friends, Jeremy. Shout out to Jeremy Mary.
Let's go.
But I started writing YouTube scripts for him and doing podcast stuff for him, just kind of like part-time basically, while I was like kind of figuring my own stuff out. And all in the background, sort of just like waiting for an opportunity. I knew, I'd been in podcasting for like 4 years, and I just sort of looked around and I was like, okay, if I did work with a company, there's like a short list of who I'd want to work for, and HubSpot like was just clearly at the top. Like they're just doing the coolest shit. They acquired The Hustle. My First Million's my favorite podcast. It just checked all the boxes. And so I was like, how do I just beeline into getting myself into that organization? And so like Sam, over the course of like those, 8 months that I was working for Noah, he would post like, hey, looking for a producer or looking for a guest booker or whatever. And the timing was just never quite right each time. But then finally, after like 3 or 4 months, he posted another one, and I was like, oh, this is my opportunity. So yeah, around like I guess like August-ish, like he posts something on Twitter saying, hey, looking for like a guest booker, I think. And I was like, he's like, in the tweet thread, in this tweet, you have 240 characters, like explain why you're the man for the job. And I put 4 bullets, like ran a podcast booking agency responsible for over like 1,000 bookings, blah, blah, blah. Just like kind of like my resume. And basically I said that this is my 10-second bio, and boom, boom, boom. And that got his attention. And also just through like him kind of knowing Noah and stuff like that, that also helped. But anyways, that was like what kind of got his attention. And then job posting comes up. I go through the whole process, and I just start like basically, so for those who aren't familiar, like The Hustle is a big tech and media newsletter, and Sam's the founder of it. He also has My First Million, his podcast. And then within that, like HubSpot has a bunch of different like channels. So trends.co is one of like the basically like the daughter things within The Hustle. I know that was a little bit confusing, but anyways, I would host events through Trends as another way to kind of get my name in front of decision makers at HubSpot. So basically like ping Sam, ping like Trends, ping like Steph, who's head of the basically like all the kind of media going on at HubSpot, and just like trying to sort of insert myself in all these different conversations and just add value up front. And so one of the first things I did was like, hey Sam, after like he responded to my my message, I DM'd him and I was like, hey, here's a list of 100 plus guests I could book on your show like in this month type of thing. And that also really excited him. And then I just started like kind of like doing work up front without any expectation, and whether it was the guest list or like these kind of spreadsheets on like how they could grow the show or whatever, I just tried to like basically make it an absolute no-brainer for them to hire me. So by the time like the actual job interview came around, I'd already built out like all these different assets that I was able to like point to during the interviews and be like, they're like, how would you, approach guest outreach? And I'm like, oh, funny you asked that. I've actually got this whole spreadsheet that I can send you how I would approach it. So it's like, it's sort of like a build once, sell twice type of thing, where it's like you just build it all up front and maybe you never use it, but the odds are it's going to come handy in some way.
Absolutely.
This is so inspiring, man. Thank you, by the way, for sharing the full story and how the pieces work together, because it does take work, right? Like it's crazy. Like when, we've been probably on both sides, where we've been, trying to find opportunities, right? And we've also, over the last 2 years, we've been on the side we need people to bring to the team. How do we handle that, right? Like, who are we actually picking, right, for these roles? And it's experiences like the one that you just described that normally we would like to find those, right? Like, so as a company, right, you're like, okay, how can I create an environment that I can, elaborate a little bit more on that? I'm like, how can we attract that top talent, right? Especially like the event that we just were, like that was one of the main topics. But also on the other side, like for example, for us, when we bring a guest, like it's us, like we don't have a EA or a VA that does it. That's our decision, because we love to connect on a one-on-one with our guests before they come in and build that relationship. It's a big part of what we do and how we do it. So I think also an important point is like you made the process like your own, and you were so proactive. So do you like?
Well, before you go on a question here. There's a few points that I think they're so valuable for the listener to understand, and it kind of goes back to those principles that you shared with the cold outreach, which is the first one, and this is the acronym we use, is WIFT, right? What's in it for them? And that's all you had in their mind. It's like, okay, how can I help them make what they are doing even better? Right? Okay, they need more quality guests. Guess what? Yeah. This is the list. I got the experience. I know how to do it. I know which guest would be absolutely amazing in your podcast because I consume your podcast, right? Then you're like, okay, who are the people that are around the environment that I want to be in? Cool. Let me be friends with them. Let me reach out to them. Plot twist right here. This podcasting is one of the best mediums to build those relationships. So, I mean, I'm not going to lie. Jonathan, obviously, I was like, this guy on LinkedIn is super cool. But at the same time, I was like, damn, this guy is the head of growth at HubSpot. Let me see if I can, try to bring it and have a conversation with him. And now, turns out we're like crockpot chili brothers over here. So,
I've been thinking about the marriage between crockpot chili and an arepa, and I'm like, I can't focus on the interview anymore.
That'd be very interesting. But, you did all this by putting them in front of you and thinking what's in it for them. So, again, at the end of the day, you're just being selfless. You're leading with value. So when the opportunity presents itself, right? I mean, you're not being reactive. You're being total opposite. You're being 100% proactive in search of this opportunity. So again, just ask yourself, right? The listener right now, what can I do proactively to go and take advantage of these opportunities? There's a possibility because you are not in control of whether the person on the other side says yes or no, but you are 100% in control on whether you deliver a lot of value up front to that relationship.
100%.
Totally. How can people use this? I'll call it at scale, right? Like, let's say you are using a strategy like this for whatever, getting clients, right? Like, it's just you. Maybe there's one VA, maybe, right? Like, what's it like? Can it be scalable, right? Like how we produce our show, and there is the vehicle of our show, it's a step in our process. But we found that a lot of people starting up, they might be very confused or intimidated, right? They're like, oh man, like that sounds incredible, but it's like just the thought of like building all that out can cause a lot of friction to actually go ahead and execute it, right? So is there a way to scale it? Like where were some tools, automation? Was it a VA? Like, was it just you, right? And just consistency? What are some things and lessons that maybe you can bring to us?
Yeah, as far as lead gen for the agency, it was a lot of hiring EAs to pull the lists, and then they were honestly the ones kind of sending emails, those two sentence emails, and then we would be the ones who responded to them. But a lot of that can be outsourced as far as finding the names and then clicking send on that email.
Yeah.
Then on the guest booking side, so the tools I loved and used at our agency. So on the kind of research side, if you're trying to find podcasts to go pitch, you can use a tool like Rephonic, REPHONIC. And basically it's just a big database that lets you search by keyword and find podcasts in your niche. I always recommend, if you're using a tool like that, like probably sort by listenership based on like, you're going to get fed like the top shows out there. So if you type in like entrepreneurship or whatever, you'll see Joe Rogan at the top, and people get bright eyes and they're like, oh, I can find Joe Rogan's producer's email. Like, I actually recommend you start at the bottom of the list, start small and work your way up, because by doing that, you're going to get better at interviewing or becoming a better interviewer. And two, like, you're just going to be more likely to get a few wins under your belt. And then you can point to those wins and say, hey, I was on this podcast. We talked about X, Y, and Z. Would you be interested in having me on yours? So that's a great tool to find shows. And then as far as like managing your outreach, I used HubSpot. That was another reason why I was super, gung ho on like working at HubSpot, because their tools are amazing. So for all of the outreach, like I manage it all in like their CRM and leverage like their sales tool for different pipelines. I have a thread on Twitter if anyone wants to check it out. It's pinned to the very top of my tweets, and it kind of details all the different tools and like how I used HubSpot a little bit. So if you want to search at BAR, the number 5 HOP, it's my last name with the number 5 instead of AS. That thread will kind of at least point you in the right direction. But yeah, the main tools are Raphonic for research, HubSpot, kind of like, backend CRM, like templates, email templates, all that stuff. And then, a few other tools that I kind of detail in that thread are just sort of like how to add a little bit of extra, like personalization to each of your emails.
I love it. By the way, the link is going to be right below. So all you got to do is scroll down and just click there, and it's going to take you directly to the profile.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that is a principle that we shared before. We call it the levels of influence, right? And let's say Joe Rogan, the example that you use is level A, right? Is probably one, if not the most difficult podcaster probably to communicate with. But you got influence level D, right? Which can be just a podcast that is a step or two above yours, and it's way easier to reach out to them, have them on your show, or vice versa. You be in their show, and like you said, just get a few wins under your belt. And by doing that, you can kind of like go up that influence ladder step by step until eventually get into your goal, right? Yeah. Again, it's not going to be overnight. It takes work, a lot of time, and a lot of consistency. So you better understand that, right? Yeah. But it's a great concept because a lot of people just try to aim so high at first, and then they just get a bunch of losses and they get discouraged and they stop doing it. When instead it's like, hey, there are so many options at just one level above you that you can leverage, right? Build those relationships, focus on value. We go back to the same principles that we've talked about all the episode today, and then you can move on to the next one. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's extremely important.
Totally. And it goes also back to kind of what I was saying earlier of like kind of picking your lane and kind of sticking to it, because there are so many podcasts out there. So if you are trying to go on every marketing show, like that's going to be pretty overwhelming. And like soon you'll be having like 200, outgoing emails, and it's just sort of like a lot to manage. But if you're like, oh, we're just focusing on content for this type of business leader or this type of company, then that narrows your search down, and you can have a list of 50 shows or whatever that probably actually would love to have you on because you're the perfect kind of like guest for that show.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, this is so good.
I know. I want to transition here a little bit though. This is great.
I want to know the secret of like how we grew 40% in 3 months.
That's where we're going, right?
Tell me.
We had a super clickbaity headline. We need to deliver on that promise, right? So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, crazy growth. Honestly, we've been a fan since like almost the very beginning. I'm not gonna lie. I told my bro I got him into that because I
addiction. Yeah, I'm like he's guilty.
Yeah, I followed the hustle. We became members of Trends since they launched it, and when they started that podcast, I was like, man, this is awesome. Honestly, so I'm curious now. What did you guys do to grow that podcast considerably, right? Specifically, I'm more interested in your role. Like, what have been some of the things that you came in there, implemented, and helped them literally scale that thing to the moon?
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think first off, it's important to note, like you said, like the show is incredible. Like Sam and Sean are incredible. Yes. If you listen to an episode, there's a good chance you're going to listen to another episode and then another episode and then another episode. And so you can't get that, like you can't knock that because it's incredible content, very like engaging hosts. So that's kind of like the baseline there. So, and then in terms of actually like getting audience. So my background is entirely in earned media, meaning I was doing podcasts, getting people booked as guests on podcasts, no experience at all in paid. And so this last 4 months that I've been at the company has been like a literal MBA in like paid advertising and podcasting, and I've learned so much. So I can kind of talk through some of the stuff we've done. We've done a lot. So kind of like basically my job when I came in was like to build this podcast growth playbook. And based on like a lot of the research I had done in the space, I kind of came to this conclusion that like, okay, Jordan Harbinger, he is sort of I don't know if y'all are familiar with him, but he's got a wildly podcast, and he's grown it from 0 to 11 million downloads in like 3 years. Wow. And a lot of that, there's definitely some caveats in there. So he had a show previously. He ended up having a falling out with his like co-founders or whatever, co-hosts. And then, so he had a little bit of like a built-in audience to begin with. He also had a lot of relationships podcasting space that he could leverage to launch a show and say, hey, can you give me a shout out? Can I get on your show? So I can't discount that. But he's kind of said over the last 2 years of all of his marketing budget, it's pretty much gone to two things. It's gone to host read ads, which is like, y'all reading an ad for Jordan Harbinger's show, and buying ads on podcast players. And this is a playbook for someone who has substantial funds to grow a show. So I'm gonna give you the background on this, but I can also give you the bootstrap version of it and how to approach with like $0 basically. But yeah, for my first million, we had some substantial budget, so we invested in all the things I just said, like host read ads, podcast players. We did a lot of stuff. We did a lot of YouTube ads, which I don't think is like the smartest way to grow a podcast, but hey, if you have extra budget, you got to put it somewhere.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other like channels that we leveraged. But at the end of like testing all this stuff from basically October to December, what we came back to is, okay, the most effective things over that time period were one, host read ads. At least for us, like, because we had the budget we could spend, and we saw, okay, if we spend this amount of money, we can get these many subscribers. Yeah. So that was one piece of it. The podcast players, to varying degrees, you'll get success. One of the most successful ones we ran was on Castbox, but that's like a $10,000 buy. So again, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
And then the third component was these kind of like viral giveaways that we did. So we did one thing where we did like a clips contest where we basically crowdsourced from our audience to create amazing clips. I think y'all actually did some of them as well.
Yeah, we did. We're still waiting for the 5K. No, I'm
kidding. Well, we're going to be doing another contest, so
I know.
Y'all's.
I'm just gonna say that we gotta step up our game 100%. Our team, they were on it, and they're not happy, and they're like, when is the next one? So they're ready. Yeah. They're ready.
I love that strategy. That was genius from you guys.
Yes.
So yeah, that was a big one. We also did we did a giveaway where we said, because not everyone can afford to, get like different prizes to give away and stuff like that. So we did another giveaway where basically you could win 60 minutes of time with Sam and Sean, which, is super valuable. Yeah. So that was another really successful one. And basically we just figured out that we have this like very diehard audience of fans, kind of like an army of people that are ready to take action, sort of at a moment's call. And so that's sort of like one of the biggest levers that we're using to grow the pod now is like crowdsourcing content, finding people who are genuine fans of the show and maybe like buying ads on their show, that kind of thing. And then, just like the podcast players, like those are kind of all the low hanging fruits.
Yeah. I feel like since you guys launched that contest and got the results, Sam has not stopped talking about how awesome and how in shock he is. And we obviously paid a very close attention to it because obviously we were participating and, 100%, we could have done 100% better every single time. Just that's the growth mindset, right?
We can always do better.
Always do better. But we're like very close to what was happening around, right? And it was incredible because you guys got people from all over the place. And then on the marketing side as well, we were very curious to see what the result of that was going to be. So just on the micro asset side of things, millions of impressions, right? So just as brand awareness, and people consume content in different ways in different platforms, right? So the TikTok consumer will enjoy the TikTok content, might be aware that there's a podcast, right? And because of the repetition, the points of contact that happens there, whenever they transition into listening to a podcast, they will tune in, right? Same thing happens with YouTube. Same things happen with other platforms. I think that's super valuable. We obviously, that's part of our product and how we help people, right? So we're going to obviously advocate for this, but we call it a safety net effect, right? Yeah. So you're developing this audience and the way that you guys executed it, right? Like you guys had a budget, right? Like it was out there, but for some people that, or the nationalities where they are, those $5,000 is life-changing, right? It could be like a full year worth of living expenses for some, right? And it was a great motivator for them, like the trade to do this, and the exposure that you guys got was incredible. So I truly hope that you guys keep doing, whether it's us, we honestly, like, that will be just this experience, this exchange has been so worth it. But just the fact that some people can put their foot out there and in an even field play and have that opportunity, and it's a win-win for literally everybody, right? Because now they also have a case study that they can go and be like, hey, by the way, this is what I did with this brand or with this podcast, right? And they can go and actually follow those opportunities, right? With the amazing cold outreach strategies that you've been saying all day. So I think
totally.
it was a great execution. So thank you for sharing.
I had two questions, and we got about 5 minutes left here, but these are the main questions that come to mind. First, of course, like you mentioned, they already had kind of like an audience that you guys can leverage, and you guys have a big budget that you can take advantage of, right? So for the bootstrappers out there, right, how can they do these things if maybe they don't have a diehard audience at first, right? And they don't have a really big budget. And I'm pretty sure this is go on the side of the guerrilla marketing type of deal, but I'm curious to listen your thoughts on this. And then the other thing is, you guys were running paid media. Are you guys turning that earned media into owned media, right? Are you guys getting people's emails, addresses, and then, doing email campaigns when you guys release new podcasts, or leveraging that as leads for HubSpot? I'm extremely curious on how you guys are, because I know advertisers for a fact, like we've been living in this world, specifically in the direct response marketing world. You don't want to just spend the money and just leave it out there in the ether, right? You want to capitalize in a way. So I'm curious how you guys are doing that.
Yeah, like it's funny. When I came on, I was expecting joining HubSpot and all these, huge company and hustle, incredible team. But when I got to my first million, it's literally Sam, Sean, the producer, and like their researchers, and that's it. And like they have conversations with the HubSpot team and make sure everything's on track. But it's like they are their own operation, siloed, kind of in their own, world.
Nice.
And I was just like, that was kind of like a shock to me. So like a lot of those, just like the reason there isn't like a weekly newsletter is because like we just haven't like prioritized it yet. But like, we have all the the capabilities. We have this huge company to do it. So those are like kind of like the someday maybe type things that we're definitely like going to be doing in the near future. But in terms of like taking some of that paid media and turning it into like owns. So perfect example is the clips contest. The guy who ended up winning that, we basically ended up hiring him,
nice.
Like more or less like kind of he handed over like a lot of the videos that he created for us, and now we're turning those videos into Instagram and Spotify ads. So yeah, totally. Like that's another like beautiful part of that is the kind of like secondary use you get out of like a lot of those pieces of content. And then I think you also had a question about like how to bootstrap if you are trying to do some of these things. So I think if you already have a show and you're trying to grow it and you don't have a lot of money, guesting on other shows and figuring out ways to do like swaps with other podcasts, or figuring out some sort of structures where you could do cross promos with other shows that are of similar size. Like that's always a good thing. That could be anything from like guesting on each other's shows to y'all each run an ad on each other's shows to a full episode drop within each other's RSS feeds.
Oh, I love that.
So there's a lot of different ways to kind of skin that cat, but that is the best way to do it is just, kind of what a lot of what I've been talking about is like kind of cold outreach and trying to figure out a win-win for both parties.
Yeah.
And then a way to kind of go. So if you're thinking about like doing a giveaway, this is a cool hack that I recently learned. I think giveaways for a podcast are great for like spark in the like flash in the pan type thing. So if you're launching a show like we just did with the Hustle Daily Show, we ran a contest. It was hugely successful. We got to the number one spot in the business news section, and we're up there with like Bill O'Reilly and stuff like that. And I just got a shout out.
Let's go, Penn. There we go.
And so basically, so like what we did there was I totally lost my train of thought. I was saying, launch. Okay, so what we did there was we had like, we had like, tech giveaway. We gave away iPad, AirPods, stuff like that. And we created this funnel that basically was just like a viral loop. So anyone who entered the contest, the first thing they had to do was follow the podcast, because a lot of people don't know this, but like not the only way, if you're trying to chart on Apple, follows are the most important thing. Like you should just get everyone to try to follow. Don't leave a review. Don't, maybe download and listen a little bit, but follows are the most important thing. So the campaign I set up was like, okay, get people to follow. And then on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, we posted videos of the giveaway. And the next call to action was like and comment on on that post. And so that way you have a consistent flood of people like liking and commenting on the contest giveaway post. And so it's just like a viral loop of people constantly like entering and getting more points when they promote the podcast. And then the more it's promoted on social, more people see it. So that's a big component of it. We also ran some Facebook ads in the background, but that's not worth highlighting. And then, so yeah, it's like a 7-day contest. And so we have $5,000 worth of tech gadgets that we're giving away. But a way to do this for free is you, and this is taken from another podcast that just recently launched. One of my buddies launched this show for a barbecue and grilling YouTuber. And he's got like a little bit of an audience to begin with. And what he did was he reached out to different brands in his space, whether it was like a grill company or like a barbecue sauce company or whatever. And he was like, hey, I'm running this big giveaway. Would you want to give me a free product? And in return, you get promo for that product. We're doing this huge giveaway. Like you're going to get a ton of eyeballs on this. And so that's a really cool way to kind of growth hack it, of being like, reach out to brands that you think your podcast, your giveaway aligns with. See if they give you free product. And then you don't have to spend a penny.
And it's incredible. Like people would say no to this, and you'll be surprised how many people say yes to this. We've done it with small businesses and different things. And it was directly related to like a funnel, and it was a whole thing. And I think the last one that we did on that specific thing, completely organically, no ads, no nothing. It was 2,000 leads in about 2 days, just like 3 emails. It was 6 different businesses. And by the way, if you're listening and you work in a local business, like a small business, this is perfect because you don't have to like do any kind of like paid media side of things. And then after that, it was like a quick transition to 300 bookings, 300 people going to like a wellness studio, right? And you're like, what? They thought it was a mistake, right? So these things, like people will say yes, you just have to go ask, right? And use the frameworks that we've shared here today. This episode is probably one of my favorites so far.
It's good.
We don't say this to everybody, by the way. I'm just gonna put this out there.
You're gonna have to listen to every episode just to prove that statement right. You know,
I know. Dude, that's awesome. Okay, by the way, I'm gonna put this out there, part 2 at some point, because
sure.
One of the things
with the chili.
With the chili and the arepas, I really wanted to explore frameworks on how you guys stay consistent. That's one of the top friction points in a lot of things, and I don't think we'll have time right now, but I really want to explore that. But Fonzie, I don't know, any last thoughts?
Just the last question is, because there's been plenty of action points in today's episode, but where would you be if you didn't create content, if you didn't publish?
Man, I am like not the most active person on Twitter. I don't have like a ton of blog posts or anything like that. But the act of going through that, and like, I think this is kind of like a something that doesn't get written about or talked about enough. But it's like, if you are doing like the reps sort of behind the scenes, and even if you don't press publish, I think there's still a lot of value there. For example, I was saying that when I left the agency in like February, I started my own podcast. I never like really released it. But I learned so much through the process of like, I did all the things. I interviewed guests and I tried to figure out the formatting, and nothing just like really stuck with me and like called me. But I am such a better like host / interviewee / like producer, all the things, because I went through that. And I never published a lot of it, but I have all the skills now. And I think that's kind of like, a lot of people say you have to press publish, you have to press publish. And I do think like you totally should, but if you don't and you're still kind of like, working on stuff behind the scenes, it's not the worst thing in the world. So I would say, consistency and all that stuff is super important, but people fall off the wagon. Like I tried to build a daily writing habit, and I did for, like 3 months, and then I fell off the wagon, and now I don't. But like, I think also people tend to hold that stuff too like close to the chest and say like, you have to consistently write, you have to consistently whatever. But like, so much of the writing I do like is just like through work emails, and that is like a short, effective like writing. It's like when I'm crafting an email to get someone booked, like that might as well be a blog post, because it's like it's so you're being so nitpicky with every word you choose. Same is true of like a report that I'm sending like my higher ups. I need every word to be like crystal clear and like super detailed. And so like, even if I'm not pressing publish on a lot of these things like publicly, anytime I click send on one of those emails or whatever, I sort of treat that as like my own pressing publish, if that makes sense.
That's such a cool answer, and very different to what we've seen in the past episodes too, because it's doing the reps, right? Like it's like, what is it? Is that every single message. I mean, at the end of the day, that's still publishing, right? It's just publishing to one person. When we first started publishing, it was a Facebook Live, and we had one person, right? It was FONZI listening to mine, and I was listening to his. Right?
Just roasting each other in there.
But it was like that was the thing that started to create momentum, right? And eventually, right, if we're very big fans of creating your own framework, your own systems, like your own team, right? That's how really you can adapt and move very quickly, right? And a lot of people still, I feel like, needs to be understood, right? It's like, no, well, the production of this, I can give it to an intern, or I can give it to like this person that doesn't know me, doesn't know the stories, doesn't know, like, hasn't published ever. So the fact that you went through the reps and share this openly to where, like, the reps doesn't mean that it has to be public. The reps can be every single email, every single DM, every single Slack message that we put out there. That's still so valuable because it's gonna help you take it to the next level. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
totally.
Jonathan, where can people find you? Where can people connect with you? Maybe if they want to read these tweets, get cold email.
Yeah. On Twitter, on Instagram, it's my last name, Barshop, number 5 instead of the letter S, so BAR5HOP. If you Google my name, I'm sure you'll find all the different socials and all that stuff. And my DMs are pretty much wide open, so hit me up.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I just hit him up when I saw the chili thing. I was like, yo, what's up? Jonathan, I'm curious. Yeah, can I get some chili? I'm curious, why the 5 instead of the S?
Because Barshop's taken, unfortunately. It's one of those like dead accounts with like one person who's following it. And I wanted to have like a universal Instagram, but it is on podcasts. It's tough to say. So I think I need to rethink that a little bit, but it also just kind of looks badass. So that's another reason.
It does look, it can also be, if you ended up doing like some merch or stuff, like a
totally
hat with a logo, that could be
Gary
like
V has his like 5, like Gary V always throws up the number 5. So I could steal that from him or something.
There we go.
Absolutely. No, I think it's pretty cool. So, I was curious if there was like an epic story behind it. Not so epic, but it's still a pretty cool story.
It just threw you on the bus big time. I mean, all the rapport that we were able to build for an hour out the window is gone. So, by the way, pick a bro. FONZI is out of the question. You good?
Part two, not happening.
Not happening.
Yeah. By the way, we got live feedback over here. The 5 looks great. Let's go.
Thanks, you, Pen. Love you, Pen.
Jonathan, anything else you would like to add before we head out?
No, I mean, I guess like to kind of reiterate on that last point, it's like you can be doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes that, in kind of like kicking yourself because you aren't like out there pressing publish and like being public about it. Mm-hmm. But I think with everything, it's like there's seasons of life. And so like right now, I just don't have the time and energy to like publicly press publish, but I'm still building like all the, tools and like systems and like crafting my own sort of like voice behind the scenes to where when it is the season to like be in promo mode and do more of this kind of stuff, like it's going to be super dialed in and like I'm going to be kind of ready and prepared. So I think that's something I'll just leave people with is like, even if you don't feel like you're making progress and you see a lot of other people like pressing publish and doing all this cool stuff on social, it doesn't feel like you're making progress, but you actually are.
So that's so important to understand. Thank you for sharing that. And by the way, as soon as you do that, we're going to be like, keeping an eye very closely because the thing that you do is like literally the secret sauce to all of this. Because you're like in the mix.
He's the genius behind the madness.
Dude, it's been it was a pleasure, man. Thank you so much again for coming up today. FONZI, anything else you want to add before we head out?
No, man. Thank you so much. It was an absolute honor having you here.
Yeah, likewise, come visit in Jacksonville.
Totally. Yeah. Let me know when y'all come to Austin. We'll get some chill.
Absolutely.
Yes. For F1 next year has to happen. We're big fans, so we'll hang out. All right. With that said, thank you so much for tuning into the Content Profit Podcast. Go ahead and follow the show in your favorite podcasting platform and on social media at BIZBROS. Go.
That is right. And if Jonathan here helped you move one step closer towards your goal, please don't forget to share this episode. And I'm not going to ask you for a review, but a follow. So see ya.
Bye, guys.